After the age of 60, something begins happening to the surface of your eye every single night while you sleep, and it has almost nothing to do with what most people call aging. It is not cataracts. It is not macular degeneration. It is not your prescription getting worse. It is a quiet structural breakdown happening in a microscopic layer that sits just a fraction of a millimeter thick over your cornea, and it is directly responsible for the blurry, hazy, fluctuating vision that millions of people over 60 experience every morning when they first open their eyes. Hi, I'm Dr. Warren. I've spent over 2 decades working as a clinical eye specialist, and for the last 12 years, the majority of my patients have been adults over the age of 60. What I'm going to share with you today is something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in a standard 15-minute eye appointment, and it explains why so many people in their 60s and 70s are waking up every single morning to a world that looks just slightly out of focus. Not blurry enough for a diagnosis, not sharp enough to feel normal, just wrong and getting slowly worse. In this video, I'm going to explain 4 things. First, the biological reason that vision quality declines so specifically in the morning hours, and what structure is responsible. Second, the 3 mechanisms that drive this process after the age of 60, and why they accelerate together. Third, what the research actually says about a natural compound that has been studied in peer-reviewed clinical trials for its ability to support this specific system. And fourth, the exact protocol, what it is, how to use it correctly, the mistakes that will prevent it from working, and what you can realistically expect to notice and when. But before we get to the solution, I need to explain the problem properly, because if you don't understand the mechanism, you won't commit to the habit, and the habit only works if you do it consistently. Let me start with something you might have noticed but never had a name for. Think about the first few minutes after you wake up. Your vision is blurry or hazy. It takes time to clear. You might rub your eyes. You blink a few times and gradually things come into focus. Most people assume this is just how eyes work after sleep, but that clearing process, that slow sharpening after you open your eyes, is actually your tear film trying to reestablish itself on a surface that it is struggling to hold together. That is the mechanism we need to understand, and it starts with a structure in your eyelid that almost nobody outside of ophthalmology has ever heard of. Inside each of your eyelids, running perpendicular to the lid margin, are a series of small glands called Meibomian glands. The upper lid has approximately 30 to 40 of them. The lower lid has about 20 to 30. Their entire job is to secrete a lipid, an oil, onto the surface of your eye every time you blink. That oil forms the outermost layer of your tear film, and it does something critical. It sits on top of the watery layer of your tears and prevents them from evaporating. Without that oil layer, your tears evaporate off your eye surface the way water evaporates off pavement on a hot afternoon, rapidly, unevenly, and the moment that tear film becomes unstable, your vision blurs. This is not a minor inconvenience. This is the leading cause of evaporative dry eye disease, and it affects approximately 21 million people in the United States. And the primary driver of it is a condition called Meibomian Gland Dysfunction. Here is where the aging biology comes in. Research published in peer-reviewed ophthalmology literature estimates that approximately 70% of Americans over the age of 60 have some degree of Meibomian gland dysfunction. That number is worth sitting with. 7 out of every 10 people in their 60s and beyond have glands that are either producing too little oil, producing oil of degraded quality, or have glands that have partially atrophied and dropped out entirely, and most of them have no idea it is happening. This is not a random statistic. There is a specific biological reason why these glands deteriorate with age, and it involves 3 interconnected processes. Understanding them matters because they all respond to the same intervention, but let me lay them out first. The first process is glandular atrophy. With advancing age, the meibomian glands undergo what researchers describe as decreased acinar, basal cell proliferation. In plain terms, the cells responsible for producing meibum, the gland's secretory tissue, stop regenerating as effectively. The gland walls become hyperkeratinized, meaning the ducts that carry oil to the eye surface become narrowed by a buildup of cellular debris. Researchers using infrared meibography, which allows you to image the glands directly, have documented decreased mean duct length, reduced gland area, and measurable gland dropout in older compared to younger individuals, even in people who have no symptoms yet. This matters because once a Meibomian gland atrophies completely, it does not regenerate. The damage is cumulative, but the research also shows that glands in earlier stages of dysfunction, glands that are obstructed or producing degraded oil rather than fully absent, respond to intervention, and that is what we will come back to. The second process is oxidative stress. The Meibomian glands sit in an area of intense metabolic activity. They produce and secrete lipid compounds around the clock. Studies suggest that oxidative stress accumulates in the glandular tissue with age, and this appears to be one of the mechanisms through which the gland's secretory function degrades. The oil produced becomes thicker, more viscous, and harder to express. Instead of flowing freely onto the eye surface, it becomes waxy and begins to plug the gland ducts. When you apply gentle pressure to the lid margin of a healthy eye, clear oil flows easily. In a dysfunctional gland, you get nothing, or a toothpaste-like material that cannot spread across the eye surface as a functional lipid layer. The third process is inflammation. Meibomian gland dysfunction and eyelid inflammation, particularly a condition called blepharitis, occur together so frequently that researchers consider them part of the same disease continuum. When gland secretion degrades, bacteria on the eyelid surface, particularly staphylococcal species, colonize the lid margin in higher numbers. Their metabolic byproducts further damage the gland openings. This creates a cycle. Glandular dysfunction allows bacterial overgrowth. Bacterial overgrowth drives inflammation. Inflammation accelerates glandular damage. Each process makes the others worse. This is why vision quality in people with Meibomian gland dysfunction tends to fluctuate throughout the day, particularly getting worse after sustained near work like reading, looking at a phone screen, or watching television. Those activities reduce blink rate significantly. Fewer blinks means less oil expression, faster tear evaporation, and an unstable optical surface. The blurring you experience an hour into reading a book is not your prescription. It is your tear film breaking down because the oil layer that should be holding it together is insufficient. Now here's the part that most people haven't been told. The visual blur that comes from tear film instability is one of the most underdiagnosed and underappreciated causes of reduced vision quality in people over 60. It does not show up on a standard refraction test, the test that measures whether you need stronger glasses. Your prescription can be perfect, and your tear film can still be causing you to see a world that looks slightly washed out, slightly unfocused, particularly in low light, early in the morning, or after extended visual tasks. And this is where the question becomes practical. If the mechanism involves lipid deficiency at the tear film, and if the root cause is degraded Meibomian gland function, then the logical intervention is one that supports that lipid layer from the outside while simultaneously addressing the inflammation driving the glandular damage. And that is exactly what the research on a specific compound has been measuring. The compound is castor oil, specifically cold-pressed castor oil applied to the eyelid margin. Before I explain why it works, I want to be clear about what the research does and does not support, because there is significant misinformation circulating about castor oil and eye health, and it is worth being precise. Castor oil applied directly into the eye from a non-sterile bottle carries real risks, including infection and irritation from additives and contaminants in non-pharmaceutical preparations. There is no peer-reviewed evidence that castor oil dissolves cataracts, reduces intraocular pressure in glaucoma, or repairs damage inside the eye. Those claims are not supported by clinical data. What the research does support, specifically and reproducibly, is castor oil's effect on the outer surface, the tear film lipid layer, and the eyelid tissue itself. Here is why it works at a biological level. Castor oil's primary active compound is ricinoleic acid, which makes up roughly 90% of the oil by composition. Ricinoleic acid has what researchers call a bipolar molecular structure, meaning it has both hydrophobic and hydrophilic regions. That structure allows it to integrate into the tear film lipid layer in a way that supplements and stabilizes existing tear film lipids. In eyes where the Meibomian glands are producing degraded, thickened oil, castor oil can partially compensate for the compromised lipid layer by providing a structurally compatible substitute that slows tear evaporation. Published research in the journal Optometry and Vision Science found that castor oil eye drops containing 1.25% castor oil were detectable in the tear film for up to 4 hours following a single application. and were associated with measurable increases in tear film lipid layer thickness and reduced symptoms for the same duration in subjects with dry eye disease. The study showed an increase in tear lipid layer thickness that was significant up to 1 hour post-installation in the symptomatic group, with decreased symptoms persisting for up to 4 hours. But the more compelling research involves topical eyelid application, not eye drops, because that is the approach that addresses the upstream problem, the glandular dysfunction and the eyelid inflammation, rather than just compensating for its effects at the surface. A randomized, investigator-masked, paired-eye clinical trial conducted at the University of Auckland's Ocular Surface Laboratory, published in the journal Ocular Surface in 2021, enrolled 26 participants with confirmed clinical signs of blepharitis. Each participant applied 100% cold-pressed castor oil to the eyelids of one eye, twice daily for 4 weeks. The fellow eye received no treatment and served as the control. At the end of 4 weeks, the results showed a significant reduction in symptom scores, measured using the Ocular Surface Disease Index, in treated eyes compared to controls. Clinical improvements in treated eyes included reduced eyelid margin thickening, decreased telangiectasia, improvement in eyelash matting and crusting, and improvement in lid wiper epitheliopathy. No adverse events were reported. The study concluded that topical castor oil demonstrates promise as a potential treatment for blepharitis and called for longer-term efficacy trials. Building on those findings, the University of Auckland team subsequently launched a larger, randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded clinical trial recruiting 92 participants, specifically to generate the kind of robust evidence needed to guide clinical recommendations. This is not a fringe remedy. This is peer-reviewed science at a major university eye research center. The mechanism behind these results involves ricinoleic acid's anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and antioxidant properties, all of which have been characterized in published literature. Ricinoleic acid has been shown to inhibit the same inflammatory signaling molecules that drive the bacterial inflammation cycle at the eyelid margin. It disrupts bacterial overgrowth on the lid surface, and its antioxidant properties may help address the oxidative component of glandular aging. What this means, biologically, is that a single compound is working on all three of the processes I described earlier: the lipid deficiency, the inflammatory cycle, and the oxidative environment that accelerates glandular damage. Now let me give you the precise protocol, because how you use this matters, and there are specific errors that will eliminate most of the benefit. The first and most critical point is what type of castor oil to use and where to apply it. You should not be putting unformulated castor oil directly into your eye. Non-sterile castor oil from the grocery store or pharmacy shelf has not been processed for ocular use and may contain contaminants, preservatives, or fragrance additives that can cause irritation or, in some cases, damage to the conjunctival cells. The applications studied in the clinical literature involve applying the oil to the eyelid margin, the skin of the lid, and the base of the lashes, not directly onto the eyeball. The specific product used in the University of Auckland trial was 100% cold-pressed, unpreserved castor oil applied with a rollerball applicator to the lid skin. If you want to use a castor oil-based approach to support tear film health, look for hexane-free, cold-pressed, 100% pure castor oil. Hexane-free means the oil was extracted without chemical solvents, which matters because solvent residues can cause irritation. Cold-pressed preserves the fatty acid profile, particularly the ricinoleic acid content. Unpreserved means no added chemicals that could cause a reaction near the eye. The application method used in the clinical trial involved a thin film applied to the closed eyelid from the base of the lashes outward along the lid margin, using a clean applicator. In the trial, this was done twice daily, morning and evening, for 4 weeks. For the purposes of daily bedtime use, evening application before sleep makes particular sense because the overnight period is when tear evaporation is most damaging. During sleep, the eye surface is in a semi-exposed state for many people, and waking symptoms, that blurry haze in the first minutes after opening your eyes, correlate directly with how severely the tear film has degraded overnight. The protocol for bedtime use is as follows. Begin with clean hands and a clean eyelid surface. If you wear eye makeup, remove it completely first, using either a clean fingertip or a rollerball applicator dedicated to this purpose. Apply a thin film of cold-pressed castor oil along the upper eyelid skin and the base of the upper lashes. You can apply the same to the lower lid margin. A small amount is sufficient. You do not need more than a thin, visible coat on the lid skin. The oil will spread slowly as you close your eyes to sleep and will work in contact with the lid margin and lash base overnight. In the morning, when you wash your face, rinse the lids gently with lukewarm water. Some people notice a slight film on their eyes when they first open them in the morning. This clears quickly with blinking and is simply the oil redistributing. If you experience significant blurring that does not clear within a few minutes of blinking, you have applied too much. Here's what the research did not show, and I want to be straightforward about this. Castor oil applied to the eyelid margin will not repair glands that have fully atrophied. It will not restore tear production in cases of aqueous deficiency, where the lacrimal gland itself is not producing enough water-based tears. It is not a treatment for cataracts, glaucoma, or structural retinal disease. If you have any of those conditions, they require medical management, and this discussion does not apply to them. What castor oil addresses is the lipid component of tear film dysfunction, specifically the outer layer instability driven by Meibomian Gland Dysfunction and the eyelid inflammation that drives it. For the very large population of adults over 60, that is the predominant mechanism behind their blurry, fluctuating, or uncomfortable vision. But that determination requires a clinical assessment, not a YouTube video. Let me talk about what to expect and over what time frame. Managing expectations here is important because the biology does not resolve overnight. In the first week, the most common early observation is reduced morning irritation and a sensation of more comfort when you first open your eyes. Some people describe waking up and noticing that the usual grittiness or burning sensation is reduced. This happens because the anti-inflammatory properties of ricinoleic acid begin acting on the lid margin tissue relatively quickly. It does not mean the underlying glandular function has changed. It means the inflammatory environment is beginning to shift. In weeks 2 through 4, if you are consistent, the clarity changes become more noticeable. The fluctuating quality of vision during near work, that fading in and out when you are reading or looking at a screen, tends to improve as the eyelid tissue responds. The University of Auckland trial showed statistically significant clinical improvements by day 28, measured under examination conditions. That is 4 weeks of twice-daily application without missing sessions. At the 2-month mark and beyond, this is where any meaningful impact on the glandular tissue itself would begin to accumulate. The inflammatory markers in the lid margin take time to resolve. The glandular obstruction, if it is the obstructive rather than the atrophic form of dysfunction, may begin to clear as the lipid quality in and around the glands shifts. This is still being studied. The long-term trials needed to quantify glandular changes over months of treatment have not yet been published. What I can tell you from the published data is the direction of effect, not the magnitude. There is a second thing happening here that matters enormously and connects to why morning vision quality is such a useful indicator of what is happening in the eye. When you sleep, your blink rate, which is 0, means no oil is being expressed onto the eye surface for 6 to 8 hours. Whatever lipid layer you went to sleep with is slowly compromised through the night. The quality of your morning vision is essentially a window into how well your Meibomian glands are functioning and how well that oil layer held through the night. This is why the bedtime application protocol targets the window when the system is most stressed. There are a few additional things that support the same system and are worth incorporating alongside the eyelid protocol if you are taking this seriously. Warm compresses applied to the closed eyelids for 8 to 10 minutes before the castor oil application, particularly in the evening, have been supported by multiple studies as a way to liquefy and express thickened meibum from obstructed glands. The heat softens the oil inside the glands, and gentle pressure on the lid margin afterward helps clear the ducts. The benefit of combining warm compress therapy with any lipid-based treatment is that you are first clearing the obstructed material and then supplementing the surface. This is an established approach in dry eye management and requires nothing more than a warm, damp cloth or a purpose-made heated eye mask held over closed eyes. Dietary omega-3 fatty acids have been studied in relation to Meibomian gland function and inflammatory markers in dry eye disease. A published review of the evidence found that the association between omega-3 supplementation and improvements in dry eye symptoms, particularly in the evaporative form driven by Meibomian gland dysfunction, shows biological plausibility through the anti-inflammatory pathways of EPA and DHA. The evidence from randomized trials on omega-3 supplementation for dry eye disease disease is mixed, and researchers note that the results have been inconsistent across studies. What is established is that severe omega-3 deficiency is associated with worse Meibomian gland function, and dietary sources rich in these fats, including fatty fish, flaxseed, and walnuts, support the same anti-inflammatory pathways that castor oil targets topically. Think of the topical and dietary approaches as working on the same mechanism from two different directions. Blink awareness is something that rarely gets mentioned, but has a measurable impact on tear film stability. Average blink rate during screen use drops to approximately 1/3 of the normal rate. That reduction, sustained over hours of screen exposure, means the oil layer is not being refreshed and tear evaporation accelerates. Deliberate, complete blinks, not partial squints, but full lid closures, during any sustained visual task effectively recoats the eye surface and buys the tear film time to restabilize. The 20-20-20 rule, taking a 20-second break looking at something 20 feet away every 20 minutes, reduces eye fatigue from sustained near work. These are not dramatic interventions, but in the context of Meibomian gland dysfunction, where the lipid supply is already compromised, anything that reduces the demand on an impaired system matters. Now let me tell you why the stakes here are larger than morning blurriness. Because they are. The tear film is not just an optical interface. It is the eye's primary external defense system. A healthy tear film contains antimicrobial proteins, immunoglobulins, and anti-inflammatory compounds. When the tear film becomes unstable and evaporates too quickly, the corneal surface is repeatedly exposed to desiccation. Prolonged desiccation of the corneal epithelium causes cellular damage and increases vulnerability to infection. The chronic low-grade inflammation that drives Meibomian gland dysfunction over years also expands to the conjunctival surface and, in more severe and long-standing cases, begins to affect the corneal tissue itself. For people over 60, this is not abstract. It means that the visual impairment from advanced dry eye disease extends beyond blurry mornings. It includes difficulty driving at night, difficulty with contrast in low light, reduced ability to read without discomfort, and in advanced cases, fluctuating acuity that interferes with independent function. None of those outcomes are inevitable if the upstream dysfunction is recognized and addressed early enough. And most people are not having this conversation with their eye doctor because they frame it as, "My eyes feel a little dry sometimes," and they are handed a bottle of artificial tears. Artificial tears compensate for the symptom. They do not address the mechanism. Preservative-free artificial tears used throughout the day can improve comfort, and I am not dismissing them, but they evaporate. They do not rebuild the lipid layer. They do not address the bacterial inflammation in the gland openings. They are management, not intervention. The research being done at University of Auckland and elsewhere is working toward evidence-based guidance on exactly that gap, on whether a safe, affordable, well-tolerated natural compound applied to the lid margin can change the disease course, not just mask the symptom. The early data is promising enough that leading researchers in this field are investing in larger, rigorous trials to find out. What we know now is this: the biology of vision quality after 60 is inseparable from the biology of the tear film. The tear film is inseparable from the Meibomian glands that provide its outer protective layer. And those glands, in approximately 70% of Americans over 60, are not functioning as they should. The compound that has the most peer-reviewed evidence for supporting this specific system, applied topically to the eyelid, is cold-pressed castor oil. Through the mechanisms of lipid supplementation, anti-inflammation, and antimicrobial action on the lid margin, all three of which map directly to the three processes driving the dysfunction. The protocol is simple: cold-pressed, hexane-free castor oil, a thin application to the clean upper and lower eyelid margins, every night before sleep, 4 weeks minimum before expecting to notice consistent changes in morning vision quality. No dramatic claims, no guaranteed outcomes. The science shows a direction of effect that is consistent with the biology and has been replicated in clinical conditions. The rest depends on consistency, on how advanced the underlying glandular changes are, and on whether you are also addressing the other factors: diet, blink habits, warm compress therapy that support the same system. In the next video, I am going to go deeper into the nutritional side of this picture, specifically the research on which compounds support retinal blood flow and macular health in aging, because that is the second major mechanism driving vision quality changes after 60, and it is a separate but equally important conversation. There are specific nutrients studied in human clinical trials that are associated with measurable improvements in macular function in people with early age-related changes, and the doses and forms that matter in those studies are not what most people are taking. If what I covered today helped you understand something about your own eyes that you didn't have language for before, that is the goal. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if you have questions about the protocol or about your own morning vision quality, leave them in the comments. I read them, and your questions are what shapes what I cover next.